Kicking off the list at number 10, what if the Fantastic Four had not gained their superpowers? Okay, the Fantastic Four, the FF, they got their powers when they were on a space mission, and all of a sudden cosmic radiation entered the chat. Powers were given to them all at the same time, each obtaining a hint of the elements. But what if this space mission didn't go south? What if that cosmic storm didn't get past the spaceship's shielding? Well, afterwards, the rocket group, that's what they're called after, becomes the highest ranking space industry, so even without powers, they're still awesome. But when Mole Man's monsters come along to attack, the team still comes out on top because science always wins. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, that would be so great. It helps the channel out a lot. Or if you want to hit subscribe, our faces will pop up on your feed. How lovely is that? Number 9, what if Spider-Man had rescued Gwen Stacy? Yes, okay, I remember sitting in the theater watching The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which is so underrated as a movie. Side note, it gets way too much for some reason. But when Gwen was falling in the clock tower, I held my breath. I knew what was gonna happen, and to this day, it's one of the saddest scenes in a comic book film. So this what if certainly helped ease that pain. Issue 24 shows us a world where he caught Gwen, and after that, it's beautiful. He proposes, he reveals his identity to her, and on top of that, Harry and Norman reunite. They work it out. All of the wins, look at this. And then when Peter and Gwen do get married at the ceremony, they're doing the cha-cha slide, which I personally love doing. But then J. Jonah Jameson bursts in with a bunch of police officers with footage that reveals Peter Parker as Spider-Man. So at this point, Peter was forced to run for the rest of his life to protect the ones that he loved. I had you in the first half. I know I did. These what ifs are mostly sad. Number 8, what if the Phoenix had not died? Issue 27 of What If again shows us a brighter future. Well, at least it starts that way. In this alternate reality, Jean didn't die. She was actually reborn again, and then when the X-Men have to take on Galactus and Terrax in the Shi'ar Galaxy, she uses that Phoenix Force to get the job done. She puts an end to Galactus, which sounds great on paper, but the Phoenix Force starts to amplify and get a little bit more and more out of control. So she accidentally destroyed a small star and other asteroids, and when she returns to the X-Mansion, she's now in hot water for destroying yet another star. Shadowcat is not pleased, so Jean turns into the Dark Phoenix and takes out Shadowcat, and Polaris, and Cyclops, and also planet Earth, and then shortly after consumes the universe. That escalated quickly, wow. Number 7, what if the Punisher was a hall monitor? Dipping into a more comedic side of things because the last two were just straight tragic, the Punisher as a hall monitor, short and sweet, and it couldn't get any better. He's watching the halls in a quiet, generic grade school in a typical town in USA. You can find this in volume 2, issue 34. It's pretty intense. I mean, it goes for the comedic take, but Frank Castle being Frank Castle in front of any children, that's a nightmare. They thought they were off the hook at the beginning of the issue. The kids reiterate the fact that the Hulk is no longer watching these halls, so they're fine. So once the Punisher sends them to the principal's office after getting caught, the last panel we see is the Hulk in the principal's chair now. It's a short one, but the idea is actually terrifying and hilarious all at the same time. Poor kids. I thought my principal was scary. I thought Mr. Hubert was scary. No, the Hulk is a bit more scary. A bit, just a little bit. Number 6, what if the Beast and the Thing continued to mutate? Volume 1, issue 37. When the Thing is being mutated from Virus X in the normal timeline, Captain America tells him about MODOK's base, but in this tale, the Thing takes off before he gets a chance to do so. So Captain America and Giant Man raid MODOK's base on their own, then they get the antidote that Bill can now use to cure his cancer. Ben reaches this point when he's evolving, and he ends up releasing all of this cosmic energy that 1, cured himself of Virus X, and 2, cured Alicia's blindness. Double win. Yes. Grimm is happy with the family, and the newly cured Giant Man takes Ben's spot on the Fantastic Four. It's good. This is a good one. We got one. Nice. Number 5, what if the Avengers had never been? Now, with all of these multiverse stories beginning in the MCU, it feels like the Avengers have never been further apart. It's exciting, but also a little concerning. This what if was actually the first what if issue with a major death, just 3 issues in. They're going for it. So we start off with the Hulk, and instead of smashing and hitting, he's dashing and quitting. He wants nothing to do with the team. So Rick Jones is sent to look for the Green Goliath, but he ends up being held hostage, where Tony Stark has to now come to the rescue. rescue. Now they make it back to the mansion, but Namor and Hulk want more. They challenge Earth's mightiest to the fight for their lives. Now Iron Man makes suits for Hank, Jan, and Rick, but they can't control the suits. It's too much for them, so they stay in retirement. So Stark powers up his own suit to the max, and then some more, so it's a lot of power going on, almost unobtainable. But then when the rest of the team finally do show up to the battle in Stark's other suits, Hank takes a hard hit. So Tony has to then transfer his suit's energy, that fat energy, in order to keep Hank alive. So even in this what if, Tony still throws his life down for others. How sweet. Number 4. What if Professor X had become the Juggernaut? In this reality, Professor X is the one who becomes Juggernaut and gets buried in the Temple of Sidorak. Now this caused him to go down a completely different path when it comes to the X-Men, because after this, well, he never created the X-Men, so now the Fantastic Four has to go against Magneto. So after Professor X Juggernaut head digs his way out, he discovers his telepathy was now much stronger with the added powers. What a treat. I mean, not really. He ends up taking over the country with his own X-Men posse to enforce these anti-human laws. Cyclops even sides with Magneto at this point because he's like, okay, at least this guy can block Xavier's telepathy. And it all comes down to this final confrontation with Cyclops and Xavier. They're battling it out on Asteroid M, and Cyclops is trying to remind Xavier about the vision, the original dream, with humans and mutants living together in perfect harmony. Doesn't that sound lovely? And then before he could really consider it, the ground beneath him exploded and he got launched into space forever. Oof! Number 3. What if Loki had found the hammer of Thor? The final issue of Volume 1 of What If, again, something we're kind of close to seeing in the MCU, especially with Loki Season 2 being confirmed. These timelines are about to be really enjoyable, and we might get a hint of this, I think. So Donald Blake ends up not finding the hammer because Loki tossed it into the woods, and then the Saturnians wiped out Donald. So Thor wakes up in the land of the dead, memory not included. This is all bad for Thor. It's not so much Loki using the hammer, he just alters the hammer's location, and then Thor's altered future is now a stressful one. Number 2. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four? Okay, with John Watts directing the newest Spider-Man trilogy for the MCU and the upcoming MCU Fantastic Four reboot, this next what if might not seem that impossible. The first ever issue of What If finds Pete with a number 5 on his chest. The Fantastic Five has a ring to it. I kind of love the idea already. So Pete was low on cash, so he figured, you know what, I'm gonna break into the Baxter building and straight up force an audition for Marvel's First Family. So Sue recruits Peter and the team is formidable. They're great, they're solid. They're so good that Sue doesn't even feel like there's a need for her on the team anymore. There's always something sad. Don't do it, Sue. She ends up choosing Namor as her other half, even joining him in his kingdom under the sea. Now she did love Reed as well, but her departure from the team just made it work better with the fishy guy. Now if you want to see more of that altered storyline, because it is quite intriguing, jump ahead 20 issues once you're done this epic kickoff. And finally, coming in at number 1, what if somebody else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by the radioactive spider? This is perhaps one of my favorite what ifs because I genuinely have thought about what would happen if I was Spider-Man. I work for Top 10 Nerd, of course I'm going to daydream about this. Thing is though, I'm afraid of heights, so it wouldn't exactly be smooth sailing. But I can dream, right? Even in the Marvel Universe, other big names can't handle the webs. In this what if, we see Flash Thompson, Betty Brant, and John Jameson each get a swing at the sticky life. So Flash gets bit and then he decides to take a crack at professional wrestling with the new muscles and all. Now he may have underestimated his strength because he kind of accidentally killed the guy. You should have tapped. Oops. Next up, Betty Brant gets bit, and I have to admit her costume is for sure the most stylish. Very good, makes for great Instagram posts, sure. But when she runs out of web fluid making TikToks, the thief who took Uncle Ben's life was easily able to get away. She was like... And finally we see John Jameson's turn, and he goes out like a hero. He tries to stop a space shuttle from crashing, and it's a lot harder than it looks. If you're not Pete, just don't even try, honestly.
Number 10. Master Jonathan Storm. Master Jonathan Storm was a member of the Four from the Fantastic, who would become Count Otto von Doom's arch nemesis as well as his prisoners. He and the rest of the Four from the Fantastic would eventually end up escaping from Doom's clutches and resuming their adventures. Master Jonathan Storm, like the rest of the team, had received his powers while on a sea voyage after their ship had passed through a mysterious light. This light, it turns out, was actually part of the anomaly. Jonathan, like his 616 counterpart, can engulf his body in flame. Doom had to keep him directly underneath a constant waterfall just in order to smother his powers enough to keep him contained. Number 9. Enrique. Enrique is the 1602 version of Magneto, and he is overwhelmingly powerful because he not only gets to keep the powers of Magneto from 616, but he also holds an important position with the Church as their Grand Inquisitor. In the world of Earth 311, mutants are actually believed to be the devil's work and are referred to as witch breed. It was Enrique's job to hunt them down and wipe them out, but being a witch breed himself, and his children Wanda and Petros also being witch breed as well, meant that he did his best to help these 1602 mutants, executing only those whose mutations could not be hidden and were generally more physical mutations. Anyone he felt he could help, he recruited to his own brotherhood in an attempt to protect them. While in our world, Magneto is more a villain or perhaps an anti-hero, in 1602, the Grand Inquisitor seems about as heroic as he could be given his position. So I think we can count him a hero here. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to go to more alternate worlds, please be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Sir Nicholas Fury. Sir Nicholas Fury was a soldier who attained glory on the battlefield and was noticed for his service to the country and the crown by the Queen herself. She knighted Fury and also made him the head of her own secret network or service of spies. Nicholas Fury would recruit other heroes to his cause, and while he might not have any superpowers to speak of in this reality, he is a key player in many major storylines and battles of good versus evil in the world of 1602. He would go on to work for King James after the death of Queen Elizabeth, and later go rogue when he felt that his own beliefs for how to best keep the country and its citizens safe no longer aligned with his king's. He also kind of began to question whether or not he even cared really about saving the world, which, fair enough. Number 7. King James. King James I of England was more of a villain, I suppose, in terms of the narrative, but it is implied that he is also possibly known by a heroic name back on the Earth of 616. In 1602 Witch Hunter Angela issue number 1, it appears that King James is none other than a version of James Howlett. If this is true, it could be that his persecution of the witch breed was simply something he did in response to his own origins and hatred of his own abilities and of himself. But it's also unclear if this is the same King James. King James, in terms of his larger role in the world, took over as a ruler after the assassination of Queen Elizabeth. He was the driving force behind the Inquisition that sought to purge all witch breed from the country. King James was shown in 1602 Witch Hunter Angela to have powers similar to Wolverine of Earth 616. King James, as he appeared in Marvel 1602, was known for being the ruler of not just England but also of Scotland, and was making progress towards conquering and ruling Ireland as well. And if you're thinking, but wait a minute, King James in the 1602 reality was not very heroic. Yes, you're right, but the version of him that is kind of combined with Wolverine, Wolverine's a hero, and so by extension, that's why he's on the list. Does that make sense? I think that makes sense. Number 6, Virginia Dare. Virginia Dare is a unique character to come out of 1602, or she was intended to be unique anyways. Some have compared her powers to that of Canadian Marvel superhero Snowbird, but Neil Gaiman and Andy Kubert, who created Virginia Dare, intended for her to be an original character in the sense that she was not made to be a mirror or counterpart to any 616 superhero that already existed. Virginia Dare's powers allow her to shapeshift into any creature, including animals and even mythological beasts. She was the first child born in the Roanoke colony, which in the reality of Earth 311 never mysteriously disappeared in the 1580s. Virginia received her powers from coming into contact with the rift that brought Captain America into the 1602 reality, and she was also friends with his 311 counterpart known as Rojaz. Number 5. Captain Benjamin Grimm. Like Master Jonathan Storm, Captain Benjamin Grimm also ended up imprisoned by Count Otto von Doom. But where Jonathan was kept beneath a waterfall, Grimm was confined to a room so small he could not even sit in it. For years, he continued to thrash against the walls, and eventually, he managed to put a tiny crack in the wall of his cell. This crack would prove to be Grimm's salvation, allowing him to escape his cell and free his fellow teammates, who then were able to join up with Sir Nicholas Fury, who was also there at the time and eager to rescue his old friend Sir Richard Reed. And if you're wondering how a tiny crack did that, well, the tiny crack was obviously the beginning of everything falling apart in his cell, so yay. Benjamin, like his 616 counterpart, has a body that is incredibly strong due to his rock-like form. He was also the captain of the ship the four from the Fantastic sailed on when they got their powers, named, of course, the Fantastic. Hence why they're the four from the Fantastic. Get it? Number 4, Stephen Strange. Or Dr. Stephen Strange if you want. Stephen Strange was taken prisoner by sailors, being sold by them to a doctor from whom he learned many things both of science and of medicine. While on a mission to retrieve herbs for his master in exchange for his freedom, venturing up into the mountains, he ended up almost dying, but fortunately was saved by the members of a monastery. During his time there, he learned the mystical arts, and after recovering fully, he was able to complete his mission, returning with the herbs for the doctor in order to gain his freedom back. He would end up becoming the physician to the Queen of England, Elizabeth I, and would connect with Yuada, the Watcher, gaining knowledge that he could only speak of after his life had ended. Now, knowing that this was the only way for him to pass on the valuable knowledge that he had gained to other heroes of his world, he allowed himself to be executed. Once he had been beheaded, his wife, Clea, retrieved his head so that she could commune with her late husband in death to learn of the knowledge he had been given. It's all pretty powerful, I think. I think if you can die and then still be like a really cool hero and like help people after you die, that's pretty powerful to me. Number 3, Hulk. David Banner is the 1602 version of Bruce Banner, aka the Hulk. He would take the place of Sir Nicholas Fury in King James's court after Fury betrayed and abandoned the new king. Initially, Banner was all for eradicating the witch breed and actually believed wholeheartedly in his mission, but after being exposed to the anomaly's energy while shielding his colleague and friend Peter Parquois, he found himself transformed into the creature known as the Hulk. He and Peter had been sent to the Americas to hunt down Fury and kill him on behalf of the king, but after this transformation, David began to question his loyalties and his beliefs. He would eventually return to England to surrender, but during his execution would actually transform into the Hulk and then kill King James. So I feel like if you kill a king, you're pretty powerful as well. I mean, the Hulk is just powerful in general. I think we can all agree. Number 2, Angela the Witch Hunter. As we learn in the main continuity, Angela of Earth 616 is actually Thor's lost sister. But in Earth 311, Angela was introduced as merely a mortal witch hunter who was tasked with hunting down and eliminating witch breeds on the behalf of King James. Later on, during Secret Wars, we would come to know her as a witch hunter who instead hunted demons. At least they seem like demons to me, referred to here as Faustians. Often these were characters we knew from 616, but then twisted into something evil in the style of the 1602 reality. So, having 311 counterparts like Captain James Buchanan. Angela traveled around with her lover and her companion Sarah, working to eliminate these Faustians in order to protect communities all over England from their villainous ways. She is immensely powerful in the end, becoming sort of a combination of her own 616 self and Enchantress after defeating Amora in this reality, but also becoming cursed with her power as a result. But even if you're cursed with power, you're powerful. Number 1, Thor of the Thunders. Or just Thor, or Donald the Ancient One. Donald the Ancient One is the old member of the Templar Order who ends up forced into becoming the mortal host for the pagan god known as Thor of the Thunders. This transformation happens when Donald is forced to defend himself and those he travels with while transporting the Templar artifact disguised as a stick that is really Thor's hammer Mjolnir. Thor is obviously one of the most powerful superhero characters in Marvel Comics, and he remains so even in this alternate world belonging to the 1602 universe of Earth 311. Number 10, Toad. While Toad might not be known for being super powerful strength-wise or even power-wise in comparison to some other characters in the 1602 universe, he does hold power and information. Toad was the one who managed to put the Grand Inquisitor Enrique, aka Earth 311's Magneto, in jeopardy, and almost got him him burnt at the stake. Of course, the Inquisitor did manage to escape, and despite Toad's betrayal, even took the Brotherhood member along with him, because he didn't really know what else to do with him. Of course, Toad probably wouldn't have dared to betray Enrique's confidence in most cases, but when his life was threatened by the Pope, he proved how dangerous he could be in regards to the secrets that he had guarded. Number 9. Natasha Romanova. In this reality, Natasha was a spy who ended up betraying Matthew Murdoch on the behalf of Count Otto von Doom, whom she took as a lover. Natasha remained loyal to Doom even after he was disfigured, but when she questioned his plan to use this flying machine to voyage to the end of the world, he made quick work of her and tossed her overboard, where she presumably plummeted to her death. Although Natasha died fairly easily and was just a human, she was still quite an adept spy. Her biggest mistake was probably just aligning herself with Doom in the first place, and thinking that it would ever be wise to question him or freely speak her mind, even when he was the one asking her to. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it, you want to learn more about 1602, please be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. I want to tell you more about 1602, so do that thing. Number 8. Lizard. The Lizard is the Earth 311 counterpart of the villain with the same name from Earth 616. He was once the philosopher Curtis Connors, who ended up contracting the bubonic plague. Connors attempted to cure himself with a concoction made in part out of dinosaur eggs. Kind of an interesting ingredient to be like, maybe this will fix it, but hey. Despite curing him, the cure he'd made also caused him to transform into a giant raptor. Oh yeah, did I also mention that there are dinosaurs in the reality of 1602? Because, yeah, there be dinosaurs here. Probably meant to exist as a version of the Savage Lands of Earth 616. Connor still had his mind after this transformation, but appearing as a monster, allied himself with another who had suffered a similar transformation, Baron Victor Octavius. Lizard was sent after the Spider, and while attempting to capture him, killed the assassin Bullseye, who was attempting to kill the Spider for his own master. Number 7. Medusa. Medusa in this reality is not a hero, but is known as a villain. She was a member of the Four who are frightful, as she kind of was in the main continuity as well for a time. Medusa, instead of being an inhuman, was simply a Gorgon who turned men to stone with her gaze. She was the paramour of Wizard, her fellow teammate. However, she accidentally turned him to stone when her veil was torn off by him by accident. I feel like being in a relationship with a Gorgon would be challenging for this very reason, because you'd have to be really careful about not looking into their face or catching their gaze. And that's of course what the protective veil was for, but in the end, having it obviously did not save the wizard, so you can wear a protective veil, but sometimes it might accidentally get ripped away. Number 6. Baron Victor Octavius. I love this alternate for Doc Ock. I seriously love it. It's so cool, it looks cool, it's unique. Baron Victor Octavius, like Curtis Connors, also suffered from the bubonic plague. In an attempt to cure himself, he created a concoction using octopi blood, also a strange ingredient, but I digress, which also ended up working but slowly transformed him into a hybrid octopus-like creature. Because the transformation from man to octopus was happening gradually, Octavius hoped to revert the process and find a cure. When he learned of the Spider, he set out to have him captured, as he figured he might be the cure, or more, the cure might be in his blood. It's kind of Morbius? Mobius? Man, which one is the vampire one? No, Mobius is DC, and Marvel, because there's Agent Mobius. Morbius is the vampire one. It's kind of like a Morbius thing actually, because I think Morbius also believed for a time that the cure was in like Peter Parker's blood for his own disease. But he ended up going after the Spider after he had already run mad experiments on captured humans and Witchbreed. Witchbreed are actually Earth 311's version of mutants, in case you didn't know. In the end, Victor would fully transform and believe that he had actually evolved into something more superior, embracing his new form. I think he went a little crazy. However, this was short-lived, as he ended up defeated by one of his scientists, Henri Lepim, who rebelled against him while in his giant form, squashing Octo Octavius with his ginormous foot. What a way to go. Ugh. Number 5. Master Osborn. While Norman Osborn in this reality more hunted for powers than possessed them, he still had his sharp wit and his conniving ways, which granted him more power than you might think in the 1602 reality of Earth 311. Osborn initially allied himself with King James in an attempt to try and discover First Nations people's source of power. Fortunately, he would not find it, but this would not stop him from trying time and time again. Even when it seemed as though Master Osborn had been defeated, he would find a way way to rebuild his reputation or escape punishment, and come back usually even more determined to secure what he believed the First Nations folks of the Americas were hiding. He was the one who killed Virginia Dare and would go on to unsurprisingly become the nemesis of Spider-Man, aka the Spider as he was known in this reality. Number 4. Emperor Numenor. While Namor is generally given anti-hero or even hero status on Earth 616, also he's definitely played the role of villain as well in the reality of 616 before, so there's that. In the 1602 reality, Namor is Emperor Numenor, the ruler of the city of the gods, known as Bensalem, that exists beyond the edge of the world. He plotted to steal away both Sue Storm and Jonathan Storm of the Four from the Fantastic to serve as both his and his cousin Rita's consorts. However, his plan to do so failed and he ended up being double-crossed by his co-conspirator Count Doom, which is usually how it goes for Namor in 616. The death of Namor also caused the destruction of Bensalem, which was tied to his lifeblood. Numenor not only possesses the abilities, strength, and durability of his 616 counterpart, but he also of course rules the powerful and mysterious Bensalem on Earth 311, which itself is advanced and holds a lot of power. Number 3. Purple Man. While Kilgrave is not really a villain within the alternate reality of Earth 311, he is the one that actually created this alternate universe. He hails from the alternate reality of Earth 460, where he became the president for life. Captain America of Earth 460, however, refused to accept Purple Man's presidency, continuing the fight for democracy, and in so doing had himself thrown back into the past by Purple Man. Purple Man didn't want any reason for people to basically rally around Captain America's cause, and decided the best way to get rid of him and destroy any rebellion would be to place Captain America into the past, as opposed to killing him in that present day and likely making him a martyr for others to rally around. In so doing, Purple Man actually created the reality of Earth 311, and Marvel heroes and villains surfaced years before they were meant to, appearing in 1602 on Earth instead of later in the 1940s and beyond. Number 2. Count Otto von Doom. Doom is always powerful, no matter what reality we're talking about, though in the 1602 universe he is also powerfully good at messing things up. Case in point, he ends up hunting for a powerful artifact that he intends to steal from the Knights Templar. When he manages to kidnap the old man Donnell and the artifact, he ends up being bamboozled into believing the artifact is a golden sphere, when in reality this item is actually a bomb, not the artifact. Doom attempts to use the artifact, only to discover it is a bomb when it blows up right in front of him, leaving him disfigured. Seeking a cure, he ventures to a city at the end of the world, the home of Namor, or Emperor Numenor here, known as Bensalem, and in attempting to conquer this city, ends up destroying it instead. Oops. Number 1. Enchantress, aka the Faustian Queen, or the Fairy Queen. Enchantress used Kip Marlowe's play Dr. Faustus to make citizens believe in demons, and seek them out to make deals with them, i.e. her. When they did such, Enchantress would appear before them as whatever they expected to see or desired to see, and would make bargains with said people. After making a deal with her, however, the unsuspecting victim would also be left with a little piece of her inside them, which would cause them to transform into a demon-like creature known as a Faustian. Angela the Witch Hunter and her love Sarah ended up hunting down these Faustians, and as such were made to do battle with Enchantress. Despite her great power, Angela was able to defeat Enchantress, but in so doing became cursed with said power, and herself became the new Faustian Queen. Number 10. Captain Namor. In this reality, Namor is the captain of the submarine vessel known as Dorma, which is usually disguised as a fishing trawler. He is the ally to Tony Stark's Iron Man in this reality and helps the adventurer Tony Stark during his quest to find the hidden underwater city of Atlantis. Namor ends up losing his ship during this adventure and later saves Tony Stark's life because of this, claiming that Stark owes him a ship, which, yeah, is fair and also a good reason to save his life. Captain Namor doesn't have any superpowers to speak of, but still keeps his pointed ears in this reality, and this is because Namor actually sliced his own ears and the ears of his crew to help him identify them, making their ears resemble shark fins. I mean, ouch, but hey, it does look cool. Number 9. Angel. Thomas Holloway was the hero known as Angel. He and his twin brother Robert grew up at Welfare Pen, where their father was a prison guard. As such, he learned much from the inmates at Welfare Pen about the criminal underworld as he grew up. After the corrupt system resulted in the death of their teacher, Sean Cassidy, and later their father, who took his own life, Thomas was taken in by a well-off family who raised him. He and his brother Robert worked together, aiming to make the world a better place, becoming both investigators and vigilantes. vigilantes. Thomas Holloway was given the nickname Angel when he was a kid for saving one of the prisoners at Welfare Pen from the electric chair. He would later adopt this name as his superhero mantle. Angel didn't actually possess any superpowers per se, but he was a skilled acrobat, fighter, and detective. And in the Noirverse, that's all you really need here. And friends, before we move on to the next spot, just a quick reminder to click that like if you want to hear about maybe more from the Noirverse or maybe just more from alternate realities in general. Ooh, alternate realities. Number 8. Wolverine. Wolverine in the Noirverse is still pretty powerful, but is not a mutant with powers in this continuity. Still, he does fight with his signature trademark weapons, his claws. Except that the claws we see him brandish in the alternate reality of Earth 90214 are weapons and not actually his own bones. Wolverine, oddly enough, has two different backstories in Noir, and it's never really explained as to if they actually connect, are related, or rather which is considered to be the actual true one in this continuity. In one series we see him as a bootlegger who spends most of his days intoxicated, and in another he is known as a hard-boiled detective with a dark and troubled past. Either way though, he's still tough as nails and the best at whichever he does. Number 7. Mr. Castiglione, or Frank Castle as he's also known in the Noir universe. Frank Castiglione Sr. was a single parent who returned home to New York City after fighting in World War I. His wife had died from cancer, and so he was left to raise their son Frank Jr. alone. Instead of wearing his skull vest or t-shirt in this reality, this version of Frank actually has a skull tattoo on his chest. Pretty badass. He attempted to protect and train his son when their family got tied up in a gang war. Mr. Castiglione is an experienced fighter and firearms expert, similar to his 616 counterpart, but just based in the Prohibition era instead. Number 6. The Demon. Kurt Wagner here is more of a neutral figure, really, if that. But in the main continuity of Earth 616, Kurt is considered a hero and a member of the X-Men, and so for that reason we're just gonna count him here as a hero for the purpose of this list. Kurt the Demon Wagner, as he's known in this reality, claims to be the world's greatest escape artist. He ended up being hired by Weapon X, which in the reality of 90214 is tied to the German government, and was working to capture the American spy Mimic. He made his first appearance in X-Men Noir, The Mark of Cain in issue number 1. Number 5. White Widow. White Widow is Felicia Hardy. She, like her 616 counterpart, usually anyways, doesn't really have any superpowers in this universe of Earth 90214. She also becomes infatuated with Spider-Man here, but is primarily involved with various villains and mob bosses. Before all of that though, she was the lover of Benjamin Urich, and acted as his contact when it came to gathering evidence on various officials and basically looking at all the corruption that was going on in the city. She managed to gather this information through her club, the Black Cat. After Urich's death, Felicia confronted his murderer, the Chameleon, who was disguised as Jonah Jameson, Urich's employer, and shot him to death. I love how much of like a fatale she is in this. It's so cool. Number 4. Daredevil. I actually really like this alternate version of Daredevil. I like him a lot. He has powers very similar to his Earth 616 counterpart, and like his main continuity version, is also blind. But what I really love about him is his backstory. He became blind after attempting to defend his father, a boxer, who was attacked in front of him and killed for not throwing a fight. Young Matt attempted to defend his father, and as a result got his head smashed into a wall, causing him to become permanently blind. Daredevil here also gets his alias from his profession as a stage performer, where he is known for his amazing stunts, hence his name. While he isn't a lawyer here, he does assist his friend Foggy Nelson, who in this reality is a detective. Everybody's a detective in the Noirverse. I love it. Number 3. Punisher. Punisher Noir, as he's known, is Frank Castiglione Jr., the son of Frank Castiglione Sr. His whole vengeance mission is actually about avenging his dad's death as opposed to his children and wife. Caught up in a gang war after refusing to pay the Schultz's protection money, Frank Sr. was attacked, and Frank Jr. decided to take up arms and get revenge for his father's death. Frank Sr. had taught his son well, preparing him for what he knew would be the war to come as a result of their choice to not pay that protection money. As such, the Punisher here is very similar to his 616 counterpart when it comes to his skills with weapons, tactics, explosives, and hand-to-hand combat. Number 2. Iron Man. Iron Man doesn't have any superpowers of his own, but instead relies on technology for his super abilities, like on Earth 616. Although I think on Earth 616 now Tony might have some actual powers attached to his body, but yeah, I think he can control tech. Tony comes armed with his own Iron Man armor here in the Noirverse. Initially, he was on a hunt for the Jade Mask, which he believed would cure his unexplained heart condition, as opposed to relying on the electrical device which kept him alive. He would be betrayed on this expedition and later team up with Captain Namor on his ship, the Dorma, to search for the lost city of Atlantis. In the reality of 90214, Tony's father, Howard, is also revealed to be the supervillain Baron Zemo. What a twist! Betrayal after betrayal for Tony here. Number 1. Spider-Man. Spider-Man in this reality does still have his powers, but is also known for being a decent investigator besides. He would go on to take on such villains as the Goblin, who in this reality is a powerful mob boss. The Goblin was also the one responsible for his Uncle Ben's death here, which is a part of his vendetta against him. It's personal, like it usually is with Goblin in most other realities for Peter besides. Spider-Man actually has the most villains probably of anyone in the Noirverse, but I guess that's because most of the Noirverse, like, he's the draw for it. It's very Spider-Man focused for a lot of the stuff we see. This version of Peter is also capable of producing organic webbing and is willing to fight with firearms. Number 10. Shame of Thrones. Weird, but in a great way. Because for this story we are heading over to the alternate reality belonging to the Little Marvels. Over in the Infinity comic Giant Size Little Marvels issue number 4, we get a glimpse into Dr. Von Doom's lair and his evil game night, which apparently happens every other Tuesday, according to Magneto. However, the whole issue consists of a tangent where the invited villains complain that Doom is the only one who gets to sit in a throne while they game, whereas they're all relegated, to normal seats. Doom argues it is because he's the most accomplished ruler among them all, and that he answers to no one. However, his mom has something to say about that. Vicky? Number 9. What if Sergeant Fury had fought World War II in outer space? I was literally going to just say that to introduce the story, but then of course it's already been said because that's the name of the story. In this comic we get to see what it would be like if, in addition to the general opposition during World War II, there were also aliens involved, who wanted to, of course, invade Earth. As such, the Howling Commandos take to the stars to fight against German World War II soldiers in addition to alien invaders known as the Baytans. Did I also mention that Nick Fury is still smoking throughout this entire issue, even while he's wearing a space helmet? While some things would change in this scenario, it seems others would remain the same. How do you even smoke in a space helmet? That seems like it would be terrible. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more multiversal Marvel lists, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. The Final Showdown. Mutant X really had a whole series, but for the purpose of this list, we're just going to focus on one of its story arcs that takes place in the alternate reality of Earth 1298, as it was a 32 issue series, so I mean a lot happened. The basic idea here though is that instead of X Factor, we have a non-government or corporate mutant team known as the Six. Havoc in this reality ends up with Madeline Pryor, and the two of them have a child together named Scott. Yeah, it's a little different than 616. Here Maddie does become the Goblin Queen, but like how we have the Phoenix Force, she becomes infected with the Goblin Force and its influence, turning her dark. Initially, Maddie is actually known by her hero mantle, Marvel Woman. As such, Havoc and their son Scotty must fight against the Goblin Queen. After a long build-up where no one is able to stop Madeline, it's revealed that Scotty is able to due to his insane level of power. He rids his mom of the Goblin influence, but also banishes her in the process. Don't worry though, just like in main continuity, Maddie would return here as well. I believe she gets banished to like the center of the earth. It's a weird place, but it's a pretty good place, I would say. Mutant X, should you read it? Nah, I think you should read it. I think you could read it. I don't know if you should, but you definitely could. Number 7. What if the X-Men had lost Inferno? I love this comic, mainly for the panel at the end where Alicia Masters' Storm whispers to her newborn babe, "I love you, baby." I think it might be one of my all-time favorite panels ever, actually. But there is lots of weird stuff to love from this issue, including the fact that Doctor Strange and Rachel Summers also randomly deliver this baby at the end. In this What If, we imagine what would have gone down if the Goblin Queen hadn't been defeated and instead was victorious. One of the things that would have come about? Her unleashing the beast within Wolverine and turning him into a villain who devours babies. Also, Rachel becomes trapped and later freed from being a bridal mannequin? I think that's a thing that happens here. That's definitely looks like what's happening. Also, I love Rachel as a bridal mannequin. And how after she's like, thanks, my face hurt, too much smiling. Oh, by the way, Doctor Strange, who frees Rachel, he also gets to wear a cool eye patch in this world. Why? Because he's Doctor Strange. He gets an eye patch. I like it. Everyone should have eye patches. I want an alternate reality where everyone has an eye patch. Number 6. Ghost Racers. This is a series that comes from the Battleworld pocket dimension that was governed by God Emperor Doom. Just like we had the Thor Corps, here we have the Ghost Racers, which is basically like its own category of racing, creating an organization or like even a company out of that set form, like NASCAR. The Ghost Racers are made up of various ghost riders who of course race one another for Battleworld's entertainment. And of course, so wealthy fans can ideally make some funds on the wins and losses of each race. Although all the riders are pitted against one another, and eventually Arcade, who is in charge of them, sends them to take down Robbie Reyes, the current racing champion, eventually they all remember what things were like before Battleworld, and they decide to rise up against those that are controlling them. Which I love. Also, I just love the idea of like just a group of racers that are just all ghost riders, and they're like, we race each other for fun. This is what we do now. Ghost Racers. Number 5. What if Wolverine battled Conan the Barbarian? In issue number 16 of the second volume of What If, we get to see what would happen if Wolverine somehow came to the time and lands of Conan and the duo ended up fighting one another. That's basically what ifs are for, right? Just seeing people that would not normally fight, and who will win. In order to revive his love, Conan is asked to bring another soul in her place to sacrifice. The soul that he decides to bring is actually Red Sonja, so that's not great because Wolverine, having fought with Red Sonja previously, had basically kind of fallen for her, and he does not agree with what is going on because of his own sentiment. He wants to rescue Sonja, probably because she reminds him of Jean Grey. Honestly, it's pretty weird to me that no one has ever said that like Jean Grey and Mary Jane Watson look similar, considering people have both thought that they looked like Red Sonja in the comics. So do all women with red hair just look the same? Is that the implication here? Or do all three of these women actually closely resemble one another, but we never really acknowledge that like Jean and MJ like look very similar, like weirdly similar. And Red Sonja's in there too. It's like the trifecta of like redheads. In the end, Wolverine takes Conan's hand in a fight that the two have, and the two end up permanently swapping places, with Conan returning to Wolverine's home reality and Wolverine staying in Conan's age. Wolverine finds a happy ending with Sonja, Conan not so much. He like sees Jean and then she goes full Dark Phoenix, and then that's the end of that. Number 4. Age of Ultron vs. Marvel Zombies. Another even more bizarre story coming at us from God Emperor Doom's Battleworld. This comic was all about the world that existed outside, actually, of Doom's Battleworld, known as the Deadlands. And if you didn't like living by Doom's rules, well, you certainly wouldn't like this. But this might be where you would end up. Defy Doom, and this could be a place that he put you. Age of Ultron vs. Marvel Zombies explored these Deadlands that were watched over by Annihilus' insect creatures. And yeah, it's about as wild as it sounds. Around every corner, with the flip of every page, awaits more gore, folks losing their heads, and monsters, monsters, monsters! I think in a world of zombies versus robots, no one really wins. Is that the takeaway here? Also, because this is Battleworld, there are lots of appearances of random multiversal characters, such as young Hank Pym, who's kinda like the main character of this, from the past alternate Earth of 51920, and the Pilgrim Punisher of Earth 15513. At least he looks like a Pilgrim Punisher. I like that he still has his skull shirt though. So he's like got the hat, he's got the coat, and he's like still got this like very 80s style looking logo and shirt. Number 3. Ruins. Ruins is just the most messed up kind of weird that a multiversal story can be. This comic offers a much darker take on what the world could be like with superpowers. Of course, it is a story by Garth Ennis, so yes, darker is definitely where we're going here. As brutal as Ruins is, well, I kinda love how dark and awful it gets. The series deals with the less fantastical, more literal interpretations of powers and their uses, and how less hopeful civilians and government agencies might react or take advantage of said superpowers. In this world, Quicksilver is just a torso with his limbs moving too fast, causing him problems, so they all had to be amputated. At least that's what's implied. Or they just didn't like that he went fast, so they amputated them. The Hulk is an irradiated pile of tumors, which ultimately dies under the weight of his own mutation, and the Silver Surfer ends up driven mad by his own cosmic existence, taking his own life by clawing his own chest open while floating through space. This is a bleak and disturbing world filled with pain and suffering. Not heroes in capes. That's part of what makes it great, and part of what makes it weird, and part of what makes it horrifying. Number 2. What if Conan the Barbarian were stranded in the 20th century? And if you thought Wolverine and Conan fighting was weird, it just gets a whole lot weirder with this issue. However, I guess I should say that it gets a whole lot less weird, as the previous Conan What If we talked about was actually from the second volume of the series, as opposed to this issue that we're talking about, which is actually from the original series. In issue 43 of What If, we learn what would happen if Conan, instead of just coming to the modern day, was stranded there and stuck there. This What If was actually inspired by another fan favorite What If featured in issue 13. What if Conan the Barbarian walked the earth today? In this story, because Conan never gets teleported by lightning home, he becomes a criminal. Because I mean, why not, I guess? He's confused, he doesn't know what he's doing. However, after creating a gang and getting into some trouble, he attracts the attention of the Avengers. But Captain America sees more than just a brute, and believes Conan is just misguided, but he has a hero's heart, truly. He offers him a spot on the Avengers, and we actually never learn what Conan decides because the issue ends. Talk about a cliffhanger. I don't know if we'll ever come back. Do we ever come back to that? It's like, will I call him? Won't I call him? And then the Watcher's like, well, I would tell you, but I can't because that's a story for another time. Maybe if we ever do it. Number 1. Marvel. Even saying the title sounds just like an experience. I don't even know where to start with Marvel because this continuity feels so just like non-existent here. There's no through line. The story is meant to be about Kal-AOL, a play on Kal-El, a kid from the future who is sent back in time to save the world and to save himself. In the future, you see the world is about to end. Fortunately though, that doesn't happen. While Al doesn't have any powers, he somehow is moderately successful as a hero. After the world doesn't end, his parents send the time machine they originally sent him through back in time to pick him up. But Al decided to travel back in time to the beginning instead. There he meets maybe God, and also learns that Wolverine evolved from an otter and dinosaurs can talk. With every issue in this story, you ask yourself, how can it get any weirder? And then it somehow does that. Also, what's up with these covers? They're almost completely unrelated to the plot of the comics. I guess sexy ladies sell comics, and so who needs a plot was the thought process with Marvel. At least with the covers. And maybe with the inside of it as well, because I don't really know what the plot is about. Number 10. Harry Osborn. This one's a dead friend. One of Peter's closest friends is Harry Osborn in the comics. Well, he is at least until he turns into a villain himself. Harry ends up dying at the end of Spider-Man 3, sacrificing himself to save Peter and inevitably redeeming himself. Peter forgives Harry for all that he has done, and he and Mary Jane kind of reluctantly get back together and attend Harry's funeral, mourning their former good friend and at one point, kind of villain. I mean, definitely villain. Harry in the Raimiverse is played by James Franco, but Dane DeHaan plays the character in the Amazing Spider-Man series. Dane DeHaan's Harry Osborn becomes Green Goblin in the second film and is a secondary antagonist, in a film that, like Spider-Man 3, suffered from too many antagonists. I'm just saying. I don't think we'll be seeing James Franco reprise the role in the MCU for reasons, but there is still a chance that Dane DeHaan could reprise the role. I would be interested in seeing more Harry Osborn in some capacity in these movies, as long as we don't bring back Spider-Man's costume from the Amazing Spider-Man. I forgot how much I dislike that costume. I went back to those movies for this list and I was like, man, still don't like that costume. It's not for me. Number 9. Uncle Ben. Cliff Robertson, who originally played Uncle Ben, sadly passed away back in 2011, but we could still bring this character back. Martin Sheen is still alive and well, who played the character in the Amazing Spider-Man series, or there is a chance we can meet a new version of Uncle Ben from the past before he died in the current Spider-Man film series. After all, I mean, we never got to meet Tom Holland's Uncle Ben, if he ever had an Uncle Ben, although he's still Peter Parker, so while it goes unmentioned pretty much, we can assume he does, I think. And friends, before we move on to our next spot, if you are loving this list and you want another list where I talk about more alternate characters in the Spider-Man universe, or just alternate Aunt Mays, because that would also be cool, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Flash Thompson. Well, we have an excellent Flash Thompson currently in the MCU with Tony Revolori, who does a great job of balancing his hatred for Peter Parker with his love of Spider-Man. There have been a few portrayals of the character that have come before him, so it's possible we could get a whole team of Flashes in the MCU if they all decided to show up from the multiverse. It all started with Joe Manganiello, who played Flash Thompson, school bully and original boyfriend of Mary Jane Watson in the Raimiverse. Also, fun fact, this was Manganiello's breakout role. I completely forgot about this until revisiting the films, and wow, I just think that's such a weirdly perfect casting for Flash Thompson. Following up Joe was Chris Zilka, who played the bully turned sensitive wannabe friend to Peter Parker in the Amazing Spider-Man series. I also really like Chris's portrayal of the Flash, so I'd also be cool with him showing up as well. Give me all of the Flashes. Number 7. Genki Lee. Another character that shows up in Into the Spider-Verse is Genki Lee, and this is definitely a character I would love to see also show up in the MCU, along with Miles of course. I don't think you can have Genki without Miles. In Into the Spider-Verse, Genki was not portrayed as being quite as close as he is to Miles in the comics, and that is part of the reason that I want to see these two pals together in the MCU. I want to see that awesome BFF connection. In the comics, Genki is Miles' best friend, who knows about his secret identity as Spider-Man. He hails from the alternate Earth of 1610, the Ultimate Universe, just like Miles. Hopefully where Miles goes, Genki will too, and hopefully that place that they're both headed is the MCU. Number 6. Gwen Stacy. Gwen Stacy is well known in the comics for being Peter's first ever love, and for many fans, his one true love. Personally, I'm a big shipper of Peter and MJ together, but you know, Peter and Gwen are still iconic and have a lot in common, and I respect that. In the Amazing Spider-Man series, Gwen Stacy was played by Emma Stone, who I absolutely love. Unfortunately, just like in the comics, Peter was unable to save Gwen at the end of the Amazing Spider-Man 2, and she died. Peter thought he had saved her, but learned that ultimately he was too late. He gave up being Spider-Man, but eventually returned to the mantle after listening to Gwen's valedictorian speech, which inspired him to become a hero once more. Emma Stone did an awesome job playing Gwen, and it would be really awesome to see her return, and to see Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man get to actually say goodbye to some version of her from the past or alternate future. Alternatively, I also wouldn't mind seeing Bryce Dallas Howard return to the role of Gwen, as she also played the character in the 2007 film Spider-Man 3. And I also just love Bryce Dallas Howard. She has done so much since then and has proven herself an amazing performer and an amazing director. Number 5. Spider-Gwen, aka Ghost Spider. Of course, this character doesn't come to us from any of the cinematic realities. Well, I mean, she is in Into the Spider-Verse, which is a film, so it is cinematic, but it is animated, so yeah. Either way, we can still get a live-action MCU version of Spider-Gwen, or Ghost Spider, as she's known currently in the comics. How cool would that be? Perhaps even someone who has played her before would be up for suiting up and rising to the challenge to take on Gwen as a superhero. Or perhaps we could even see a new performer take on the role and show up as a new character in the MCU, but a familiar character for those fans of Into the Spider-Verse or of the comics. Number 4. MJ. Alternate MJ in this sense. For this one, I am talking about the return of the great Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane Watson, Peter's next door neighbor, high school crush, and true love. I love Zendaya as MJ, but that doesn't mean we can't have some alternates show up as well when the multiverse starts to open up, and I think that is where we're headed here. If that happens, then we could all of the sudden be seeing different MJs appearing. Who knows, maybe we'll even see Shailene Woodley's performance, as she apparently had her portrayal of the character cut from The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Number 3. Dr. Octopus. Doc Ock appears in 2004 in the second Spider-Man film to come out of the Raimiverse, Spider-Man 2. There he was played by Alfred Molina. Although we haven't gotten the film yet, Molina appears to be reprising the role of Doc Ock and will appear in the MCU in Spider-Man No Way Home. He's spotted in the trailer, and aside from that, he has been rumored to be making a return almost since day one with this movie. Molina did himself confirm his return in an interview with Variety, and Zendaya, who plays MJ in the MCU, has also confirmed his return in an interview. We'll have to wait to see him show up in the MCU and see on what level he's returning. Will he still be a villain, and how did he escape the river he supposedly drowns in at the end of Spider-Man 2? Number 2. Venom. With the post-credits scene from Venom Let There Be Carnage, this is a character that many of us expect to see in Spider-Man No Way Home, or at least somewhere in the MCU. Although to be fair, Spider-Man really makes the most sense here when we're talking about when and where this character would be expected to show up. Tom Hardy's Venom is a bit of a hot mess, which is also why I cannot wait to see what will happen if we get both him and Tom Holland's Spider-Man together on the same screen. Venom of course does seem to break through to a world where Spider-Man's identity has just been revealed by the Daily Bugle. We even see Tom Holland's face on the TV screen when we see that reveal, so it seems very likely that these two will be meeting up again somewhere in the MCU. Hopefully Venom doesn't lick Spider-Man when they do meet up, because I'm not ready for those weird fanships. Number 1. Norman Osborn. Obviously Willem Dafoe's version of Green Goblin is still something all of us remember with extreme fondness. No matter how you feel about the Raimiverse, you probably still love Willem Dafoe and his portrayal of Norman Osborn. Will Norman be coming to the MCU? It seems super likely just based on all the teases that we've gotten. Will he be played by Willem Dafoe? It's what many of us are expecting as the multiverse gets cracked wide open, likely as a result of Doctor Strange's spell backfiring, possibly because he was so distracted by Peter's constant rechanging of the parameters of that spell he was attempting to cast, which would of course warp reality. Green Goblin is one of the most iconic Spider-Man villains out there, if not the most iconic. I would say the most iconic, but some people might disagree. So it'd be really awesome to see him return in the current film franchise. Number 10. What if Spider-Man had never become a crime fighter? What else would Spidey get up to? Well, in the long run, he basically ends up as a kind of television personality, an actor, and a producer. Spider-Man makes movies that he stars in as an action hero, but still keeps his identity a secret. In the end, he works toward promoting other vigilantes through films that he produces, and still ends up getting involved in crime fighting of sorts. A ton of villains in the form of the Sinister Six end up fighting against him. Well, really they end up fighting against Daredevil, and then Spider-Man's like, Daredevil, help me. But in the end, he's like, I gotta help because Daredevil's just one guy and he doesn't really have superpowers in the same way that Spider-Man does. Included in this Sinister Six team-up is J. Jonah Jameson, who blames Spider-Man for the destruction of his life and his paper. In the end, Spider-Man realizes that he really mucked up by using his powers for gain instead of for good. Which, fair. But he did have a really sweet cape, so there is that. Number 9. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four? The story that started it all off. What if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four is what if that in theory doesn't really sound too crazy until you realize what happens as a result. Spider-Man initially attempted to impress the FF by breaking into the Baxter building to show off his skills and strength. This happened way back when in the original comics. However, in the main continuity reality, they weren't too impressed by his antics and initially denied him entry to the team. In this version of the story, however, Sue Storm feels compelled to give Spidey a chance and help make it work so that he can pay his and Aunt May's bills while also acting as a hero within the team. However, she later becomes jealous when she is left behind on a mission and Spider-Man gets to go, which, I mean, fair enough. Sue's like, hello, I'm here too. In the end, this causes her to run into the arms of Namor, who she then joins, leaving Reed Richards, and with Spider-Man taking her place on the team. Sue is also transformed into an Atlantean by a device Namor created just for this purpose, in case I guess it one day happened that Sue wanted to join him and become an Atlantean, and she can no longer as a result breathe oxygen. I just love how this story ends. I feel like it's kind of random, but it's also kind of great. I just ship Sue and Namor so much, that's the problem here. I'm into it. I'm like, yes, Sue, be Namor's conscience. Rule the underwater kingdom. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it and more what if videos, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Also, we got a what if playlist, so go click the playlist wherever it is on the screen. I don't know, is it here? Is it somewhere? Click it. Number 8. What if Thanos joined the Avengers? Just even saying this title feels weird. This one comes to us from the one-shot What If Infinity Thanos. In this story, Thanos ends up joining and being accepted into the Avengers while they face off with the Builders. He and the team succeeded in defeating their enemy, but at great cost, losing Captain America along the way. In a shocking twist of events, even more shocking than Thanos becoming an Avenger in my opinion, he also ends up taking up Cap's shield after he dies in battle, and almost seems to Mourn his loss? It's a weird one, but if you want to see Thanos rub shoulders with Thor and Captain Marvel, then this is definitely the story for you. Number 7. What if you were Spider-Man? This is one of those very short stories that is summed up within basically a page, or in this case, 2 pages. 2 panels. Here, the what if question posed is, what if you, yourself, were Spider-Man? I mean, if I were Spider-Man, I would probably carry my partner a little more securely while swinging around town, and I'd try to be a little kinder to myself when it came to all the self-guilt and blame that we usually see Spider-Man feeling over all of his failings. I'd definitely be doing weekly therapy sessions if I were Spider-Man. But don't think too hard about what you do differently or the same as Peter Parker, because the end to this what if is pretty hilarious and dark all at once. Because you are then greeted with a panel featuring a tombstone that says, "Here lies Spider-Man," where there is also a little space for you to fill in your name, and a bunch of villains surrounding it. Because of course, none of us average Joes could make it as Spidey. Har har. But also, it's probably true. I don't think I could actually make it as Spidey. Although we would have powers, right? I guess if we didn't have powers, we'd really be screwed though. Number 6. What if Helen Taylor had become Nova? This story takes place in the pages of issue 15 from Marvel's first What If volume, beginning in 1977. Here we get a few stories involving alternate characters taking up the mantle of Nova. One such character is a woman named Helen Taylor, who is basically a random civilian, redhead, and a wife. Or should I say a widow? She gets the power of Nova just after her husband is murdered in the streets in front of her after a mugging gone wrong. Helen swears to use her newfound power to get revenge, believing the powers are kind of an answer to her plea for some way to extract vengeance on the murderer, who we know as Willie DeBrow, or Willie DeBro, depending on how you want to say that. Nova sets off shaking down every criminal joint she can find in the city and making quick work of the Kingpin along her way to boot. The Fantastic Four manage to stop her and capture her to find out exactly what her powers are and where they came from and sort of why she's doing all this. And while this is going on, we learn that months ago, Willie perished in a car accident and has been dead ever since. What a twist. And if you're like, months ago, does that make sense? Yes, this story takes place over the course of months. I actually went back to look for that because I was like, that's so crazy, it's such a long period of time. A long period of time and only a few pages. Number 5. What if Ben Parker's nephew was Galactus? I love this story. This is a humorous what if story included in issue 3 of volume 2 of the What If series. In this story, we find out what would have happened if Uncle Ben's nephew was Galactus instead of Peter. Galactus arrives home to find out that his Uncle Ben has been murdered, but he refuses to accept this, mourning the death of his uncle, who gave him his very first microscope. Oh no. With a mere thought, he vaporizes his uncle's murderer, reducing him to protoplasmic slime. Then he uses the power cosmic to restore his uncle to full health, even giving him powers and turning him into a Silver Surfer version of himself. Silver Uncle Ben? The story has a happy ending, with Aunt May satiating her nephew's hunger with a very hefty helping of wheat cakes. Oh, it's so great. It's so wholesome. Number 4. What if Wolverine had lived during the age of Conan the Barbarian? Or more specifically, what if Wolverine had fallen through a portal and ended up in the age of Conan the Barbarian and then lived on there? Yeah. This is what happens here, and of course, because this is what this story was always meant to be about, Wolverine and Conan end up going head to head, because we all know this is really a what if Wolverine and Conan fought each other story. In the end, Wolverine falls for Red Sonja because redheads, and Conan also ends up falling for Jean because redheads, after he falls back through a portal that sends him to Wolverine's time by accident. All in all, Conan ends up getting pretty messed up here, losing his hand, and then when he does return to Wolverine's time, without Logan's presence, Jean ends up going full Dark Phoenix and basically destroys the universe. Meanwhile, it's a happy ending for Wolverine, who stays in Conan's age and ends up with Red Sonja. What a strange but fantastic adventure. You can check this one out in issue 16 of the second What If volume, starting in 1989. Number 3. What if Spider-Man married Black Widow? This one is another one-panel story brought to us in volume 1's jam-packed humor issue, issue 34. Here we see a one-panel story that answers the question, what if Black Widow and Spider-Man ended up getting married? This is also just a strange question to pose, as these two, well, they don't have a ton of interaction in the comics, and they've never really been known to have any kind of long-lasting romance that could potentially lead to wedding bells. However, there could be a reason for that, it turns out. The what if uses a bit of wordplay for this scenario, implying that because Natasha is a Black Widow, she would end up eating Spider-Man. After all, that is what Black Widows try to do, in nature that is. I don't know if Black Widow could actually catch Spider-Man in the comics. I feel like he might be a little too fast, and he's also got a spidey sense, but whatever, it's just a fun what if story, so taking it way too seriously. Number 2. What if the original Marvel bullpen had become the Fantastic Four? In this what if, we get to imagine what it would be like if the original Marvel bullpen had become the FF in real life, each being given their own superpowers matching the actual Fantastic Four team. Stan Lee as such becomes Mr. Fantastic, Flo Steinberg becomes Invisible Woman, or Invisible Girl as she was still known then, Sol Brodsky becomes the Human Torch, and Jack Kirby becomes the ever-loving Thing. The story is crazy over the top, and it doesn't seem to paint any of them in too kind of a light, to be honest, with the staff being transformed by a mysterious device delivered to the office sent courtesy of the S people. But who are the S people? They end up becoming even more famous than their comic book counterparts, the original Fantastic Four, and eventually ask Prince Namor for help. They don't get turned back into their normal selves, but they do uncover the mystery of who the S people are. Any guesses? S, it turns out, stands for Skrull. Surprise. I mean, I was kind of surprised by that because I was like, what starts with an S? And for some reason, Skrull did not come to my mind. Not reading a lot of Skrull stuff lately, obviously. Number 1. What if you were the Red Skull? I get the idea of what if you were Spider-Man, but what if you were the Red Skull? I mean, out of all the villains to pick, that is certainly a weird one to include here, Marvel. I did not see that coming. This story is also featured in issue 34 of the 1989 volume of What If, right under Spider-Man. Now, I see what they were trying to do, give you the option of a what if you were a hero or what if you were a villain, because, you know, that seems kind of fair. But I mean, given Red Skull's history, it just seems like a weird one to include when you could have picked, I don't know, a bunch of any other villains that exist that people might want to be more. Like, what about Doctor Doom or Green Goblin, which would make sense with Spidey, or even sometimes villain, sometimes hero, all-time thief, Black Cat. I mean, I would want to be Black Cat. Wouldn't you want to be Black Cat? She's so cool. Number 10. What if Jane Foster had found the Hammer of Thor? This one isn't so strange for the premise, but it's more bizarre because of where the premise took us in the end. This is a story we've also seen adapted to the main continuity, though fortunately it does not quite share this same ending, which I'm pretty happy about, to be honest. Jane ends up finding the Hammer of Thor and becoming the goddess of storms, taking up the mantle Thordis. Lady Sif, missing Thor, ends up finding and falling in love with Donald Blake, who is later revealed, of course, to be the true Thor when Odin asks Thordis to return his hammer to him. As thanks for her service, however, Odin makes Jane a goddess. However, as Jane was in love with Donald, who is now Thor and is in love with Lady Sif, her heart is broken, and she has to be returned to her mortal self because of this. But Odin has a better solution and proposes to Jane, who agrees, to marry him, and then they all live happily ever after. With Jane finding that those very qualities she both admired and loved in the mortal Don Blake are also to be found in the father of immortal Thor. My goodness. That's a very strange ending to that story. How about instead of being with my son, you be with me, his father, haha. Okay, Odin, what? I feel like I like it better when Odin just doesn't really like Jane. I think that works more. Is that weird? Number 9. What if the Avengers were the last superheroes on Earth? This story allows us to imagine what the world would be like if all the superpowered beings on Earth were defeated by the Avengers. At the behest of the Scarlet Centurion, the Avengers attempt to eradicate all superpowered beings, including themselves. In the end, after all threats have been defeated, they decide to disband, being the last ones with powers, in order to usher in an era of peace on Earth. They all go off to live their own normal-ish lives. Thor returns to Asgard, Tony returns to being a billionaire playboy in Las Vegas, only to realize that it doesn't really bring him any joy and actually considers entering into politics. And Janet Van Dyne and Hank Pym actually seem to find quite a bit of happiness, going off and getting married and focusing on their time with one another, which is kind of sweet. I guess if they weren't superheroes, it would work out pretty well for them. Scarlet Centurion does return to threaten Earth and forces the Avengers to come together one more time, but after defeating him, they once again go their separate ways back into retirement. And they also kind of question, like, if being a superhero is actually a bad thing, because does it create more problems than it solves? Just a quick reminder, if you love these what if lists, I personally love bringing them to you because these stories are amazing. Be sure to show us that love by giving this video a thumbs up, sharing, commenting, subscribing, all the things. Number 8. What if the Gamma Bomb spawned 1,000 Hulks? This story comes to us from volume 2 of the What If series that started back in 1989. In issue 71, we get to imagine a reality reality where instead of just one Hulk, or the members of the Hulk family plus Hulk, we had 1,000 of them, which I would say is ultimately too many Hulks. In this story, it was the bombing on Hiroshima that resulted in these thousands of Hulks coming into existence, survivors of the attack that were basically mutated, so they became Hulks. In the end, Bruce Banner, aka Hulk, who of course goes on to become the Hulk in the story, must attempt to stand up against this army and attempt to defeat it with the help of some friends. Number 7. What if Betty Brant, instead of Spider-Man, had been bitten by the radioactive spider? This one comes to us from a 3-part story and is simply one story within that. It is from the original What If series Volume 1 from 1997, issue number 7. Here, Betty Brant, instead of Peter Parker, is the one bitten by the radioactive spider, gaining spider-like abilities. While the story isn't a strange premise at all, I don't think it's weird for Betty Brant to become, a version of Spider-Man. What really makes this one stand out for me in terms of its weirdness is Betty's costume here, which is it's something. It's also odd that in this alternate reality, Betty happens to be the only alternate person to become Spider-Man that manages to survive the ordeal, with both John Jameson and Flash Thompson in this issue, who are featured in the other 2 stories, dying as a result of gaining spider powers and attempting to use them. Instead of Betty choosing not to pursue the thief that kills Peter's Uncle Ben, she simply is unable to because she used up all her web fluid posing for pictures for Peter. Which is a whole other thing, but also, wait, can't you just go after them anyways? Don't you have superpowers? It doesn't matter that your web fluid is gone. Anyways, she still blames herself for Uncle Ben's death and decides to quit being Spider Lady, which I think is a little harsh. I feel like she wasn't really super responsible for that, but I guess she could have gone after him. I don't know why she didn't do that. Be like, use your super strength, climb on walls, do any of the other things you can do. Number 6. What if Submariner never regained his memories? This story allows us to glimpse into an alternate reality where Namor never met the Human Torch and never ended up regaining his memories and returning to Atlantis, learning that he was the true ruler of the Underwater Kingdom. Instead, the Submariner remains unaware of his true heritage and ends up joining a ship's crew, finding himself inexplicably drawn to the sea. I wonder why. The captain of the ship, Namor's friend McCandless, ends up being mutineered against and goes overboard while injured when he believes they found the lost entrance to the center of the earth. Namor, or Mr. Smith as he's known, follows after him and ends up being retrieved from the ice-cold water by Inuits later on. They end up worshipping Namor as the Lord of the Frozen Sea, along with frozen Captain America, who they worship as the Lord of the Frozen Ice. And Namor's like, I guess this is my life now, and I'm pretty good with it. So I guess it all worked out in the end, and now he just gets to be the Lord of the Sea really far up north where it's cold. Cool, I guess? Number 5. What if Iron Man was trapped in the time of King Arthur? While all of these stories are based on things that actually did happen, this is also based on something that did happen, so if you think it sounds weird because it's just so random, that is a thing that actually happened, where Iron Man and Doctor Doom in main continuity traveled back to the time of Arthurian legend. However, rather than getting back home in this version while Doom manages to leave, he leaves Iron Man trapped in the past. Oh no! A weird turn of events ends up leaving Tony Stark as the ruler and king of England following the death of his friend King Arthur. Tony actually proves to be a great king and lives out his days there in the past just as an accomplished and celebrated ruler. I actually wonder what effect that would have had on the present, because I feel like everything would be very different if Tony Stark were the king of England. This all goes down in issue 33 of the 1997 What If series, so you can check that out if you want. Number 4. What if the Fantastic Four had different superpowers? One of them is just being a giant brain. It's true. Actually, overall, these powers feel very Doom Patrol meets X-Men in my opinion. In this alternate story, when subjected to cosmic radiation, the FF get completely different powers than what each member has in main continuity. Johnny becomes a robot, Ben gets dragon-like wings, Reed is just a disembodied brain, admittedly not a very great power, and Sue ends up with the least original powers, getting Reed's old powers instead, the ability to stretch her body like Taffy or Silly Putty. Really, I feel like Sue always gets sort of like the worst part of these stories whenever she's in a What If. Hers are always so like quick or just so kinda lame, and I'm like, dang, why does an Invisible Woman get some cool stuff? Or think she was still Invisible Girl at this time though, maybe that's why. Number 3. What if Aunt May instead of her nephew Peter had been bitten by that radioactive spider? This story reimagines what would have happened if once again it was not Peter Parker who received the fateful radioactive spider bite, but instead was his elderly Aunt May. This is from a humor issue, so you know it's gonna be weird and you know it's gonna be great. And it is. Aunt May here ends up getting bit after realizing that Peter had left his lunch at home on the day he and his class were meant to visit the exhibit at the Science Institute. And if you're like, Amanda, it's not called the Science Institute. Seriously, if you go to this issue, that is what is written on the building in the Science Institute. Of what? We don't know. She successfully delivers the forgotten lunch to Peter, cottage cheese and mashed string beans, but ends up feeling unwell on her way home and finds that she has developed superpowers. She makes her own costume, becoming Spider-Man, and ends up facing off in this story with the ridiculous villain Leapfrog. Because that's just how it goes. Number 2. What if the Fantastic Four all had the stretching powers of Mr. Fantastic? Oh boy, I love this issue because we get 4 stories where we get to imagine what it would be like if multiple members of the FF shared basically the same powers. And in the one where they all get stretching powers, they just never end up becoming the Fantastic Four because their collective power is just considered, well, kinda lame. Sue in fact insists that they never let anyone know of their powers because she feels like, and I quote, a freak. Both Sue and Ben feel as though the stretching powers are ridiculous, monstrous, ugly, and dumb, while Reed and Johnny actually think they're pretty neat and even could be useful. Still, Sue and Ben's way of thinking wins out, so the Fantastic Four never become a superhero team. The end. Number 1. What if Thanos had changed Galactus into a human being? I really love this What If story personally. It comes to us from, once again, one of the humor issues of What If, so you know it's gonna be a riot. In this story, Thanos turns Galactus into a human being in order to defeat him, and Galactus ends up on Earth with no memory of who he was or is. He does, however, happen to look a lot like Elvis Presley, and even sings and plays like him too. He meets a woman named Gertrude who introduces him to the works of Presley, and Galactus is basically convinced that he must indeed be like an amnesiac version of Elvis Presley, returned from the dead. He goes on to have a successful music career, and when his memories are later restored by Adam Warlock, who also offers to return his power to him, he actually decides instead to stay on Earth and live out his life here as Elvis with Gertrude and her son Toby. Which, I mean, fair enough, that sounds like a pretty good life.